Hello and welcome to another episode of Just Get a Real Job with your host, me, Jamie McKinley. I'm recording this week's intro live with the guest on the call, which is very unnerving, but it's a pleasure to welcome back on the show Cat MacLeod, who we first had on 2 years ago. Cat is a writer, a director, a producer, and also the founder of And Friends, which has been doing some amazing work across Scotland. And it's a pleasure to welcome you back on the show, Kat. How are you?
I'm really good. Lovely to hear that live.
We're being time efficient this week, Kat. We're being time efficient.
I know. We're very busy people.
Yes, and I think a good place to start is we just had a nice chat off air, but we're both very tired. We're both feeling very
Well,
tired, quite burnt out.
we are, the word I keep using is burst, but I feel like a burst couch. I feel like I need just some time to be like reupholstered and just to sit for a while. Such a weird metaphor.
I know, I know.
I've been watching a lot of Interior Design Masters, what can I say?
Yes, no, it does. I think I've been very honest on the show often, and I think being a
Yeah.
creative person, especially, you tend to have to work a job to pay your bills. Even if
Hmm.
you work a creative job. I mean, I do this podcast on top of a TV job. It's very tiring, and I don't want to sound like I'm not grateful for all the amazing things I've got in my life, and I'm choosing to do this show, but it is a lot to juggle, and I think I just like to sometimes be honest about it, and I think it's very common at the moment. I know a lot of people working in the creative industries that are just tired because we have a cost of living crisis and things just feel pretty hard at the moment in some ways. So, I don't want to shy behind that. I don't want to explain why I might be yawning in today's episode.
No, I totally feel the same. And also, I think it's really interesting that we use the word, or when we talk about how tired we are, it's always with the caveat that, I'm really grateful. And I think it's almost like we're gaslighting in ourselves into thinking that, tiredness is somehow
Hmm.
gratitude when the two things can work. The two things can exist at the same time.
That's very,
Um, and adding the guilt of that on top of feeling tired is not really helpful to us all as people.
but I also think even outside of the creative industries, like most people, a lot of my friends, just I think being an adult is just generally quite tiring. I mean, probably we're by being on our phones too much and seeing screens too.
Oh, yeah.
And then add into that someone like me who holds himself to a ridiculous standard that they're probably never going to achieve. You just put a lot of pressure on yourself, and it can be hard.
Yeah. Do you know, I have a job and I have a career. And what we were saying about working to earn a living, like it's a job and I like it and I take it very seriously. But one of the most beautiful things about it is I can put my phone in my locker and not be on my phone for hours at a time and either just read or take notes or write down ideas or just be present wherever I am in that job has made such a difference because it means that I'm not available. I'm not available to answer texts. I'm not available to answer emails. And I think that has really changed how I approach things in a really good way. But yeah, you're right. When I do have my phone on me, I'm like, oh God, it makes me feel really self-conscious and really
Mm.
down about working in an industry adjacent job. But of course, when you're scrolling, you see opportunities for things. You're like, oh, I need to apply for that. Or you see things that you're not qualified for, and you're like, why? Like, it makes me more uh, full of rage
Yeah.
than ever.
And then the comparison as well. You're just constantly comparing yourself, which is silly
Yeah.
because there'll probably be someone that's doing that to you going, oh, I wish I had what they had. And you never know what's going on with someone either. And I was saying as well, I was at a networking event yesterday. And usually I feel really energized after networking events, but it just made me feel a bit shattered. I was like, you know what, you're like, I've got all this work to do. Um, yeah, it feels like a bit of a strange time, but there's also lots to be positive about. We've got you back on the show because we're doing an event together, which we'll talk about in more detail. But we are doing a live event together with Just Get a Real Job and Anne Friends in Glasgow. There's links to it below if people want to go and find it more. We're going to talk about it in lots of detail today, but that's actually 2 weeks tomorrow, which is kind of scary as well, isn't it?
It is. I think it's one of those things that we were like, oh, I remember we sat down in a coffee shop and we had all these great ideas. And I came away from that meeting being like, oh, this is great. This is what I love to do. I love getting together with people and just making plans and knowing exactly why we're doing those things because they feel really valuable and they feel really exciting and they feel it's like networking, but it's more solidarity than it is job seeking, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Um, but then, life kind of takes over and you're like, oh my God, I could do with another month. But then I think the beauty of a lot of things that I've done over the past year, especially with Unfriends, is that I decided to do it and I did it, and yeah, it freaked me out. And yeah, I ran out of time, but it still happened and it was
Mm.
still great in its own special chaotic way. Although I am trying to be a bit more mindful, and separate chaos and creativity. They don't necessarily have to live together.
No.
And I'm also like, maybe the call's coming from inside the house. Maybe I am just a chaotic person, and that's how I'm always going to make stuff happen. So, yeah, big existential questions going on, as well
Yeah.
as being very tired.
I think it's going to be quite an existential podcast today. And hopefully people will still want to come to our event after listening to it, but I hope
Yeah.
so. Um, before we get into all that, though, let's recap. So we had you on the podcast 2 years ago, roughly.
Yeah, mental,
The episode
mental.
came out on, I think it was July 2023, but I think we would have recorded it probably around May 2023. So roughly exactly 2 years ago, basically, which is mental.
We
Um,
did because I remember I was still at home on Mull and I hadn't moved to Glasgow yet.
yeah,
And I moved to Glasgow early May 2023.
yeah, you were
So,
about to move to
yeah.
Glasgow just after that. Yeah, I remember. And I had just recently, I'd only lived in Glasgow for like 6 months then, and I was still in the flat I'm in now. I'm about to, this will be the last podcast I ever record in this flat, actually, which is kind of a little milestone there as well. I've recorded so many, I've probably recorded about maybe 50, 60 episodes in this flat. So it's kind of,
Oh.
yeah, the last one here. Getting overly nostalgic for a flat there, but
Yeah.
I digress. Um, I digress.
Maybe that's our pattern. Maybe the next time we do a podcast together, one of us will be moving again.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, there you go. There you go.
That's just the
I
thing.
mean, I'm not moving from Mull to Glasgow, to be fair. I'm moving from 3 streets away, so
Glasgow to
not quite the
Glasgow.
same gravity. But there you go. Well, what I was going to say as well was it might be nice as well if you want to quickly sort of give us a bit of a recap to what you've been up to since, because you've done like the Sean Connery Talent Lab. You started a company called I'm Friends, which you can explain what that is, so if, our listeners know as well. But what have you been up to for the last 2 years? How have you been?
Do you know, I love questions like that because it makes me realize that it makes you realize what you've achieved, and that's actually a really lovely thing
Mhm.
to do because we don't do it very often. So yeah, after the podcast that we recorded all that time ago, I moved to Glasgow and I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know what concrete things were available to me after that. And that was just after I'd worked with Vanishing Point. That was just after my first play had been on and been on tour, and that was such an exciting time. Um, and then I moved to Glasgow and, tumbleweed. I kind of didn't have anything happening and going on. And, I was seeing my friends a lot, but I wasn't working. I didn't work for a really long time when I just moved to Glasgow, which was very stressful and I think brought up. I was probably quite miserable when I first lived in Glasgow, and
Mm,
that's nothing to do with, the connections I have. I've got so many great friends in Glasgow, but there was nothing creatively happening for me. But it was in the first 3 months of living in Glasgow that I wrote my play Blast Off Starburst that then went on to go to play Pine a Pint last year. So it was and that was a really cathartic piece of writing for me. So I kind of felt like that was the most creative burnout I've ever had. Which I don't necessarily recommend waiting for, but I had a lot of big life experiences that I don't think I'd really processed. And then having the time, albeit quite a depressing time,
mm,
just kind of really made me focus on the things I could do. And I just started writing, and that play just kind of vomited out. It just came out, um, which was probably, the result of about 3 years of percolating an idea. Um, and then after that, it was the following year. Yeah, that following year was the Talent Lab that we started March, April, no, May. Oh my God, I can't remember. Time is going so fast. It was basically like essentially this time last year
mm,
that I got into the Sean Connery Talent Lab, which was great. And I And that was quite a hilarious process. So I was working with the writer Lana Fayton, who's from Sky, and the I think the Friday before the Monday deadline, I'd seen on her Instagram, are there any directors out there who would be up for partnering to apply to this with me? Because I'd ruled myself out. I thought, nah, do you know what? I don't really feel qualified. I've only made one film. I haven't written or directed anything in quite a while now. By that point, it had been basically a year since I'd directed. I'm not really sure. I read Lana's script and I loved it. The script's called Lady MacLean, and it just really, the vibe just felt incredibly personal, even though I hadn't written it. So it's about a character called Myrid who's moved back to Skye after being in the city for a really long time and is really struggling to find her place again. And I just loved the script. I thought it was so vibrant and so fun. And I thought, do you know what? I would love to direct this. Why not? Why not apply for this? It sounds great. We had no idea what it was. It was a brand new thing. Um, yeah, and then we got that. And I know we'll probably go into the talent lab and the nitty-gritty of making a film. Um, but yeah, that like last year was probably the busiest creative year I've had in a while in terms of, working on the talent lab. And then we shot the film last October,
Mm.
and then I basically went almost straight into Play Pint a Pint, my first Play Pint a Pint, right, like directing a play that I'd written, which was hugely exciting. And kind of in between all of that, in amongst all of that, And Friends came about.
Mm.
So I think And Friends came about basically April last year. I mean, again, we'll probably, I could do a whole podcast on why I started And Friends. But the impulse for me was having so many conversations with people who'd come out of a really awful year of having no work and not getting opportunities, and opportunities been very thin on the ground. And I really just wanted to put on a night for fun to see how it went and invite people to come and share new work. And in the last year, it has just got so much bigger than I could have really imagined. And the fact that we're still doing scratch nights that people still come to, and that is the model still seems to work. I feel, yeah. I mean, I was saying you earlier, I feel like a very reluctant producer in that I've always kind of, before working with Vanishing Point, I made my own work, and I just used to call producing admin. And
Mm.
then realized that what I was doing was actually a whole job that you usually get someone else to do. Um, so yeah, poverty and necessity made me a producer. Um, and yeah, that's kind of a rambly recap.
No, it's
Um,
nice to recap. I do love having people back on the podcast. Though I've done it quite a few times now, and it's nice to reflect on what people have been up to,
yeah,
and then also be
I
like,
want to go back and listen to that and be like, what did I say I wanted to do? Because you sometimes you just don't realize that you've achieved all the things you wanted to do
hmm.
until you find, your old diaries or
Yeah,
all
well,
that
weirdly,
lovely.
again, it's getting quite a deep, this podcast is going to be quite a deep existential one, but I try to
I love
journal
it.
most mornings, right? And I think this morning I wrote this. I've talked about this on the podcast before. I was writing about how, like, you've achieved things you said would make you happy, and you're still it's not enough, or it's been good, but you're still finding ways to critique yourself. Or I think so many
Yeah,
people listening will relate to that because 2 or 3 years ago, if I'd even said where I want the podcast to be or where I want my career to be or things like that, you'd probably be like quite happy, but then you always go, well, I've not done this yet, or I've not had enough downloads, or you know oh, I could have done this thing better. Or you need to try and also appreciate where you are and enjoy. I mean, it sounds cliche, and I say this all the time as well, but the most important thing is actually enjoying the process of what you do. But I think also trying to be a bit more, have a bit of perspective and be like, well, I'm quite happy with what,
yeah.
because otherwise you
And
just for the future. Sorry, continue.
Sorry, I keep cutting you off. I get very excited. I think this was also something I did last time. I just am like, oh my God, you said something really interesting. Um, I think what's changed so much though is that I feel like my mission has changed. Like my
Mm.
I have absolutely achieved certain goals that I wanted to achieve 2 years ago. But it's almost like, especially with starting and friends, which has been it's been such an evolution for me. Like I initially started it being like, do you know what? I want to create opportunities for myself in terms of generating work or producing work or being a person that makes stuff happen. Um, but as soon as you kind of get into that space, especially in the theatre industry, the space of doing things grassroots, DIY, very community focused, what has ended up happening is I've got in too deep. And by that, I mean that is the space where you realize where there is injustice in the industry and where people are being neglected and where people are losing out on opportunities because suddenly you're surrounded by people and you're spoiled for choice in terms of work to program. And then it really, really highlights where the failures are in the industry, that
Mm.
all of these people aren't getting opportunities. So I think my initial impulse to create and friends has shifted so much in that now I see it as something that has a much bigger purpose than just a scratch night. And I don't mean that to be demeaning. It's not, scratch nights are not just scratch nights. They are so much more than that.
Mm.
But it feels like there is a whole other mission to it. Um, and I think also the response to it. And I was actually, chatting to Val and Ruth, who are a big part of the Anne Friends team yesterday. And kind of I had a whole agenda, and I was like, these are all that we haven't got together in a room for a really long time. This is all the things I want to talk about. When we launch our website, I want to use it as a platform for certain advocacy.
Mm.
And we're kind of getting into it now, Jamie, but there's um and again, this is just through having conversations with people who are in the same boat as me, who have pretty good CVs and are still on, emerging director salaries. And by that, I mean, less than 50% of your income is made through your creative practice. Um, so many people I know have applied for opportunities that are aimed at emerging theatre makers, but those opportunities have been given to established companies or established playwrights. And that's no shade to those people who get those opportunities, but the goalposts are shifting constantly.
Mhm.
And what's happening is that emerging and early career creatives are being completely neglected. And I think when you are earning less than 50% of your income from what you do, that's when you're in that position to be like, okay, well, I either leave the industry or I keep going and remain poor and burnt out.
Yeah.
Like that is the tipping point. When you are in the emerging artist category, you are in a tipping point. And I think a big part of what I want and friends to do is to say, hey, do you know what? Here's a definition for all the career stages. And you can categorize yourself however you like. But what we want to do is hold opportunities accountable.
Mm.
So that if something is aimed at this career tier, that's who it goes to.
Yeah.
If we end up, if Anne Friends ever gets to a point where we have money to give away and we say our money is for a certain level of practitioner, that's who, like, there's a level of transparency that I think is really missing.
Yeah.
And I get really passionate about it. And in a way, I said to Ruth and Val yesterday, I just want you to be okay that sometimes I may use Anne Friends as a way or a platform in which to criticize the industry in which we exist, because there are things that need to be said.
Yeah. But
And both of
I
them were like,
think,
well, yeah, that's just who you are.
but I
So,
think criticize maybe isn't the right word because I do a lot of that. We obviously are working together in this event because
yeah.
our platform share quite a lot of similar values, and I've done a lot of similar advocacy around, especially particularly with TV where I have a lot of expertise because I work in it. But talking about ongoing things that aren't working in an industry and representing the voices of people in that industry to try and bring about change or start conversations. And it's an interesting one. I think there's a lot of, we talked about entry level positions. Like, I think what I find interesting in TV is that there's similarities there where like it's kind of different in TV where there's actually too many entry level in some ways, but there isn't really because in an ideal industry you would have those opportunities. But there's what's actually happened is there's not at the moment enough of a sustainable industry. So a lot of mid-level creatives are leaving the industry or having to step down and go for more junior positions, which then
Yeah.
stops the junior people getting in. But what you
And
actually
that's what's happening with directors in theatre in Scotland.
Yeah, and what you need to do is actually fix the whole thing because what also happens is you bring new people in, they have an amazing start to their career, but then 2 years later there's nowhere for them to go and they leave the industry as well. Or you just
Yeah,
have people in a
100%.
position like me where they feel a little bit stuck because there's not that many opportunities for me to like naturally find or go into that are sustainable, and then you start to consider other careers or if
Yeah.
it's very limited and you end up losing people. So it's an interesting one, and I think yeah, I don't think the word criticize feels like the wrong word because I think it's actually very constructive the way that you go about doing that. And yeah, but we're talking about I'm Friends, and I think a good question to sort of quick, chat about in case anyone listening doesn't know what I'm Friends is, but take us back to the moment you decided to start it. Like, what is I'm Friends? And why did you start it apart from what you just said about it?
So I had the idea, and friends, it's got a little dash before the and. A little underscore because Anne Friend started as a scratch night, and I realized scratch is kind of an industry term. Basically, scratch performance is brand new performance that is being essentially workshopped in front of an audience. So usually it's work that has never been seen before, it's never been performed before. Actors, if the work is text based, will have script in hand. It's very scrappy, it's very DIY. It's such an exciting way of presenting new work because testing work in front of an audience is such an important part of the development of new performance. Um, and I knew that I wanted to run a night like this because for that very first, I was really inspired by the people who surround me. Like, I think 99% of my friends are in the industry. And I got this idea of Anne Friends being a scratch night that is sustainable in a way for me because I knew that I didn't potentially have the network and the capacity to program every night that we did.
Hmm.
So in I guess in kind of a selfish way, I was making my life a little easier. But also there's a big part of me that just thinks I'm not a taste maker. I'm not like a person of influence. I'm just a person. I'm just a person who is trying to make a living as a creative person. How many times can I say person? I am a person, I'm not a robot. Um, so I wanted to pass on the night to a different artist each time so that they could look at their circles could put like because I was imagining people in my position who are feeling equally frustrated and also equally frustrated for the people that they love and care about who are trying to make a living in the industry. And I think that is the great joy of working in the creative industries is that the people you work with become your mates. And in my case, become your best pals, become the people you probably know better than anybody. And when they win it's and they get opportunities, you feel a great joy. You feel like there's, a sense of justice because you love them and love what they do. Um, so Anne Friends was designed for there to always be a prefix. So the name of it is kind of designed so that there will always be a guest curator and friends. So Anne Friends is both us as a production company and the friends of the people who are curating.
Mm.
Um, and it has expanded. So that like the scratch nights, we run them 3 times a year. That is always going to be uh, the flagship offering. It's always the thing that we do. Um, but we also now run a space that I got last September through a charity called Outer Spaces that essentially it's kind of a guardianship of a disused office. Um, and they're a great organization in that they are filling empty corporate buildings with visual artists, with now a lot of theatre artists. They work between Glasgow and Edinburgh, I believe, also East Kilbride. You're tired, Jamie.
I'm not. I promise we'll edit that out.
It's real. We're real here.
Mm,
Um, yeah, really, so yeah, managing that, I think. But I mean, to be perfectly transparent, I think the management of a space, I wanted it to be it is free for people to use and it's busy all of the time, which is brilliant because again, that says to me that there's so many people making work, um, and they are able to do so because they don't have money and can get a space for free in order to do that work, which is really exciting. That takes up a lot of my time. I think when I first got the space, I initially thought, great, do you know what? Now I can really put time and effort into curating a program of artistic development events. I can do workshops. I can use the space for rehearsing and workshopping my own work. And um, so that's kind of the compromise of the space has been, I don't get to do that at the moment. But what we will be doing later in the year, sort of when we launch our lovely website, is that we're going to launch Anne Friend Studio, which is our producing side. So then we will be able to join projects as a creative partner or a producer, or, use our cumulative skills to help generate work, but also generate our own work and
mhm.
self-produce
Very
and get
exciting.
back to the creative side of things.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting.
So yeah, those are the three strands of what we do. Also, I have recently posted on social media about being burnt out and being exhausted. Um, and I think as well, there are weeks when Anne Friends is my full-time job that I don't get paid. So there's the added pressure of being needed because if I don't answer emails, people don't get the space.
Mm,
And that is a huge responsibility. Um, and it's not the work that's exhausting, it is the lack of money. I'm kind of not shy about that anymore. Like being poor is exhausting.
mm.
I shouldn't say poor. That has other connotations that don't apply. Being skint is exhausting.
Yeah,
Working incredibly hard for free is exhausting, even though I've done this to myself.
yeah.
Um, so in many ways, Anne Friend Studio is what we do for money.
Mm,
It's us putting our skills to good use, for a fee,
mm.
which I'm hoping that, um, well, I'm hoping that people, will want to work with us because of the way that we work and what we stand for, and how hard we will work for other people. I think that's, I'm kind of really hoping that I hate using the word brand because that makes it feel like every decision that's ever been made has been made to an end. It's been made for a purpose and it's been, strategized and done, market research and there are things that I've posted on Instagram that have been things I've decided on there and then because it was just in my heart to say it. Um, but maybe it's not a brand, maybe it's just a character, maybe it is the nature of what we do that is kind of honest, and I'd hope that was the case.
Yeah, but also you have to treat things that you run in a sort of business way. I know creatives get uncomfortable with it,
Oh,
but at the end of the day, you do it is a brand in a sense, and you do have to market it, and you do have to like, it's fine to want to earn a living from someone you put a lot of time into. I sort of It's a strange one. I mean, but I can relate heavily because with the podcast, I put a lot of hours into this, and often I'm not making a huge amount of money on it. We have a Patreon, which I'm very grateful for. We have to people that put money into that, and we're in
yeah.
the middle of getting some more sponsorship, and that would be
Oh,
amazing if it
brilliant.
comes in. But we're not talking like I can't live on any of that money. This is something I do on the side. I love doing it. I get a lot out of it, but I don't even know how many hours go into this. So, that's my decision as well. But that is also, that comes at a cost as well. Your sacrifices, by doing that, you're sacrificing time in other places in your life. And, that can become easily quite tiring or become harder to do without like, because if you have money for something, it also gives you more opportunity to bring on more people to help you or
Yeah.
there's loads of things there. And I think you've been really clever in using things like skill swaps or, working collaborative with other people and giving them back things in other ways. And I think that's really helpful. Um,
Yeah.
but there's links to I'm Friends in the show notes. If you want to go and find out more about the space generally, you can go and find that out, as well as our live show, which we're going to be putting on. So let's actually talk about the live show thing now because it kind of ties into I'm Friends.
Yeah.
We're doing it in the space, aren't we? So do you want to describe it? Do you want to have a shot? And then
So this again, as with most things that Anne Friends does, it came about from a conversation
Mhm,
um where we were I in particular was thinking, how do we share information? How do I find a way of bringing people together for the purpose of demystifying certain things? Um, and the focus of the film event, we've got a panel of some really, really brilliant guests who are making really exciting work. And the majority of the guests are making really exciting work micro budget for no money or very DIY or have great strategies for fundraising. So we're aiming, it's called Brave New Work, making indie film today. So the focus of it is all, how do we
mhm,
make film if we're new to it, if we have no money, how do we put our creative ideas into action without waiting for funding or without waiting for someone to say yes? Because it is possible. I've seen it happen. Our space has been used for films that are really low budget. It's been so exciting to see that the space transform for those films and to be able to offer again that space for
mhm,
free. And so often see people using skills exchanges as part of making work.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, I'm I mean, you'll be the one asking all the beautiful questions.
Well, let's see
But
how.
I am really excited because, you and I, again, we do have that really shared value of saying or approaching all of our work with a great deal of honesty and
Mhm.
empathy and just basic, humanness of meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
Um, So I hope, and what I know, I mean, looking at the guests that we've got, I know that it's going to be a really honest conversation, but also a really uplifting one. I personally find it really uplifting to look at a panel of people who have very wildly different experiences to me, who are making very wildly different work. Um, and just I think there's nothing more inspiring than just seeing someone stand up and get it done
Yeah.
and be honest and upfront about the things you need to look out for and advice to, avoid getting and avoid stretching yourself too thin. How to maintain enthusiasm for what you're working on when there's no money in it. And I'm not, that's it, basically.
Yeah.
I could get carried away.
And also just like how people have actually made films happen with like no money. So if you're interested in how people have done it or how they're in the
Yeah,
process of doing it, or
yeah,
also I think what's interesting because there's quite a range. Well, the panel will sort of all be announced by the time this episode goes out, and you'll be able to find out more. But the panel that we sort of got so far, I mean, which there's still people to confirm and stuff, but they've all got quite different experiences as well. So there's people that have got more experience, there's people that have come from a theatre background into filmmaking, people that have
yeah,
worked in telly, and yeah, no, it's really and it's only a tenner as well. It's not just a live podcast. There's a social. So if you're based in
yeah.
Glasgow or the Central Belt or anywhere in Scotland, I mean, even if you're in England or whatever, you're welcome to come up for it. It might be quite a lot, but yeah,
I'm
it's
going to
not
be
just
getting some food and drink, so there's
food
going
and
to be
drink.
nibbles. It's going to be a really nice chill. I know we were talking about networking, but it's going to be a really nice chill. I hope that it again is something that is creating solidarity, but also a really good chance to meet people who are on your level and say, "Hey, do you know? I would love to do X. I think that networking for me, something that I forget is that it's actually a really exciting thing to be able to go into a room full of people who there's so much potential for collaboration and being able to say, hey, do you know what? I love XYZ. I would love to do this. And then, hey, maybe three people turn around and say, yeah, it's not really my vibe. Or three people turn around and say, great, let's do it.
Mm, definitely. So as you say, there's links in the show notes, and this event is on the 22nd of June, 2 p.m. So it's a Sunday, chill Sunday afternoon vibes. And yeah, there's more details on the event. But no, I think so. Anyway, we linked the event, but I think what you're doing at Fred is really inspiring. So congrats on it, and it'll be exciting to see the space for the first time as well because I haven't seen it yet. So I'm looking forward to being in there for the event.
Yeah. It's it's I feel very, very lucky. Every time I go in, I just think this was an empty shell. And now we've been so lucky with donations. We've been so lucky with people coming in and dropping off furniture, um, plants, books. Someone donated, a very, very generous person donated a fridge so that we can, people can come in if they're working long days, have a fridge to, it's very cool. It's just very, very cool. Every time I go in, I'm like, oh, I have an office. I have, a place to go in and write or to go in and work from or take meetings, and that other people can do the same.
Yeah, and the
It's
fact that it started off something you were doing yourself, and now you've got a team that you're kind of working close with as well.
yeah, yeah, it's brilliant. I've really struggled to delegate, um, which again I think has really contributed to burnout in that I've not been, well, it's been very, very difficult to get Val and Ruth together. So Ruth is a stage manager and is working all over Scotland, and actually reached out to me early last year because she just moved back to Scotland after being away for a long time. Um, and it's basically our kind of in-house stage manager for all of our scratch nights. And there are some other great stage managers that we work with who, when Ruth isn't available, because she's very in demand. Um, And Val is an actor and writer and also a producer. And Val was one of the artists that we programmed for one of our scratch nights, and she shared a really beautiful excerpt of a play that she's written. And then I feel like Val is very much like my emotional support. Um, yeah, she's definitely the person. She's a great sounding board, and she's also great at telling me off when I'm being silly, or yeah, picking me back up when I'm kind of losing steam. So we did have a really great kind of 4 hour meeting to say, hey, this is a recap of everything that's happened in the past year. Um, Sitting down and saying, cool, I need help with all of these things. Please help me. Going through the process of that, which is, because the space bookings are on a rolling basis, that does actually become an enormous workload, which is pretty straightforward. I took a really long time to work out the system for that. And it again, it's not, it's when you're asking for space, you're not bothering me. I never want people to feel like that's the case. It is just, it's a lot to manage. It's a big calendar, squeezing people in. We are so busy that, so often we book up a month in advance.
Mm.
Um, And you kind of, I think for me, it kind of been has something that I've had to be really on the emails in case people email and say, can I get a space tomorrow? And we have it free. I don't want to say no. Um, but I think, yeah, going forward, we'll probably have to be a bit stricter about our own time limits. And also now it'll be one of three people who get back to you.
Like
So
definitely.
there's
Yeah.
Yeah, which is great, but it's also meant that I've had to step up and really clarify what that is, which is again a big part of when the business evolves and it's not just you.
Mm.
Um, you have to be able to communicate what these systems are in order for other people to actually help you. Um,
Yeah,
which
completely.
is another lovely thing. A lot of people do get in touch and say, I would love to help, and I think it's not that I don't want help or don't need help. I think a big part of that is that then introducing other people to the workload becomes an additional task.
Hmm.
So I think then, going forward, and I also don't believe in asking people to volunteer or people working without an exchange or working for free. So bear with me is what I'd say on that. There's a whole system that I need to put in place for that kind of
Yeah.
um exchange.
Mm. No,
Um,
definitely, definitely. I was saying at the start of the episode, but I'll obviously listen back to our last chat, last before we did this one,
mhm.
from 2 years ago, and you'd at that point were just you just done Spin, your
Yes.
play, and you'd talked also about your film you made on Mull in that
Mhm.
episode. But what talk to us about firstly, like the film you've just made with the Sean Connery Talent Lab, but you touched on at the start, and also how almost we sounded like babies when we were talking about AI and technology.
Yeah.
Jump ahead now, it's mad. I suppose there are two very different questions, so we'll come back to the AI
Yeah.
one. But tell us firstly about the film, and then I want to talk a little bit about AI because it's like kind of mad in 2 years. What's changed?
Insane. Insane. I mean, you could say I was ahead of the curve there, Jamie. I warned you. I
I'm
warned you.
amazing at myself not knowing what ChatGPT was called, considering how prolific it is now. Mental. Anyway, tell us about the film first, because it's probably more cheery than AI chat in some ways.
Yeah, do you know what? It's called Lady MacLean, and as I said, written by the brilliant writer Lana Phaeton, and it's bilingual, so half English, half in Gaelic, really. And it's a really lovely. I mean, lovely is probably not the best word. It's a really like borderline surreal comedy about what it's like to be from an island and returning home after being away for so long, and how there's a kind of really internal feeling of failure in that, where maybe you haven't achieved the things you thought you would achieve, and then you're back home, and you're maybe a bit nervous about what other people will say about you. But then the other side of the film is very much about class and about how local people are being priced out of their homes, because Myra, the main character, she's come back to Skye and she's got a job working as a waitress at a big fancy ball, which is a real thing. It's a real event in Portree called I think it's called the Gathering, the Skye Gathering.
The horror film.
And it's kind of like all the landed gentry
Mm.
come to Skye for this big posh ceilidh. And Lana was actually inspired by a news article of a real event where a local man went up to the gathering hall after being in the pub and tried to get in and was refused entry. Into this hall that sits in Portree and is there as part of the furniture of the town. And he ended up headbutting the laird's son, I believe. Um, because there was this altercation of who is and isn't allowed into this space. So the film is this really beautiful journey of this woman falling back in love with where she's from and finding a real sense of peace and belonging in that community, but also standing up against that kind of, I guess, gentrification and class injustice.
Mm.
So it's got real heart, but also a real kick to it that I
And
really, really enjoy.
this is doing the festival circuit now, right? After your right?
So it will be. So we've actually just wrapped. We've just completed the film. And yes, we are now looking ahead to festivals and seeing where it goes. Um, but yeah, it's really great to have made a film as part of the NFTS. So we've got a lot of support from them going forward. So it is just, waiting and seeing where it goes. So hopefully there'll be news soon and hopefully everyone can come and see it.
And overall, did you have a good time on the Talent Lab? It was the first year it ran, so you know.
Yeah, it was. I think I had maybe kind of a singular experience in that I was the only director. And by that, I mean Lana and I were working as a team, and all the other directors had also written their scripts.
Right, okay, so you're a solo director.
Yeah, yeah. It was great. We had so much, a huge chunk of the time on the lab was incredibly useful because we got into the nitty-gritty of what it is to write a film. And then we had great mentorship
Hmm.
in terms of breaking down visuals, in terms of, how to direct actors, which is probably something I went into the lab feeling, I don't want to say feeling confident in. I felt like I was in a good position. Like directing actors is probably one of my favorite aspects of the job.
Mm.
I really, really enjoy working with actors and I really enjoy that exchange of ideas. Um, but I was, yeah, very, very green when it came to working with a cinematographer. And I'd actually never been in the room with an editor. So my first film, the editing was done remotely. So it was the case of, getting passes through and giving notes. Whereas the editing process is probably the most fulfilling creative partnership I've had in my career to date. Worked with an absolutely brilliant editor called Roddy MacDonald. Shout out Roddy. Um, and the edit feels that was a revelation to me, to be honest, was
Mhm.
just how amazing it is to get into an edit with a really, really skilled editor who has such an eye for good storytelling
Yeah,
and really encourages you and inspires you to make very clear decisions when you encounter problems or encounter, it was a classic novice filmmaking experience for me in that there were absolutely things that I should have shot and didn't, um, or elements of the scenes that didn't necessarily blend together.
yeah.
Um, but I mean, it was also a joy because the raw material was so exciting. So our cinematographer, Alison Thompson, she's from Bermuda and has just such again, a lovely eye for filming people. Um, so all the footage was just, I feel like we really got some incredible performances and got some some really fun shots that I think really lend themselves to the comedic aspect of the film, and some really beautiful, nuanced, dramatic moments, which again speaks to, the cast were just incredible. And it's one of those things that now on reflection, a little lark, I made it with two actors and a skeleton crew. I think we had four members of the crew.
Mhm.
So it was tiny. It was really, really tiny. And then Lady McLean, we had an ensemble cast of six actors in pretty prominent speaking roles. And we had a supporting cast of about 20.
Mm.
And then the crew was obviously 60 people. So it was just this enormous step up in terms of, really being strict about schedule. And, our producer, Katie Malander, was just brilliant. And we had a great AD. Yeah, it was just the actual process of shooting and then editing something of that scale and with that many moving parts was just brilliant. And I find it very difficult to kind of talk about what the experience was like because all of those sections were so wildly different.
Yeah.
And
No, it's interesting though. I think people find it useful just to hear about the process of making a film, and you'll hear more about it at our live event in 2 weeks as well. So please come along.
yeah.
Keep plugging that throughout. Um, let's go into the AI thing, which is a slightly different subject. But Spin, are you feeling like you predicted the future a little bit there? Because Spin, your play we talked about, people can go back and listen. I think it's episode 103 as well if you want to hear Cat's first episode 2 years ago. So the podcast has changed a lot in some ways since then. But still enjoy a good episode. But your play Spin was about a washing machine that basically starts stealing its owner's data and they become sentient, etc., etc. Do you feel like you predicted the AI thing, or has it even shocked you a little bit how much?
I think the play was so inspired by. I mean, the play. When I look back on it, the play was a ridiculous idea because it is essentially about an artificial intelligence washing machine that becomes sentient enough to steal its owner's data, but also end up controlling her the way, a coercive partnership
Mm.
uh, functions. Um, I think I just saw. I mean, I think I wrote it intending for it to be funny, and the kind of horror elements are just reality, are just the most sinister aspects of AI. I mean, it's a play I would love to do again. It's also something I'd really love to adapt for screen because I think there's still so much to be said about our relationship with what is now an evolving and increasingly sophisticated technology.
Yeah, it's mad as well because 2 years ago when we recorded our chat, I didn't, I'd never used ChatGPT, and now it's something. In all honesty, I do use. I don't do everything on it, but it's a useful tool. It's a useful tool, and it's mad to yeah. And that's in 2 years. That's in 2 years.
Yeah. But I think it's also, I mean, back then I was using it out of curiosity.
Hmm.
Um, and I found it kind of disturbing even then, the way that it could give me advice. I think that was something that really threw me off a little bit. But now I think it's become increasingly divisive. And I say that because there are some obvious downsides, and maybe downsides is actually too light a word. There's some really sinister elements of it that genuinely impact us as creatives.
Mhm.
Um, the fact that it is being trained using
Our
art
work.
artist material without their permission. Um, AI also crops up quite a lot in, artwork, promoting shows and films and
Well, we used
um,
a recent thing with the train and with ScotRail using an AI instead of an actor.
exactly, exactly.
Ironically, and just reminded me as well that we were stuck on a train. I actually bumped into Kat in person last week. We got stuck on a train
Yeah,
on our commutes, which is just a random coincidence. And that voice was what was telling us that the train
was
was
AI.
quite, yeah, and that's not, it's not a good thing that they could
Yeah.
get an actor to do that.
And I'm really concerned about it's basically like all technology. I'm deeply concerned about how it will be used for evil. And by evil, I genuinely mean to replace and harm humankind.
Yeah. Did you
Um,
this? Sorry to interrupt. Did you see this? You just reminded me that did you see this thing in the somebody was showing me this morning. I was having a
Mhm.
coffee with them, and there's a thing in the London Underground at the moment, and this poster saying "Stop hiring humans," and it's like a product for AI, but I don't know if that's a joke and like that's some sort of tongue-in-cheek thing where they're taking the piss out of AI, or if that's a legit poster. But there was pictures of it. They'd just been in London. They'll show me. This
Yeah.
stuff's
Oh my
here.
God.
Mad.
Well, isn't it like Duolingo has replaced all of its human employees with AI?
Yeah, and Klarma did the same. I think they replaced half their customer service assistants with because it's AI agents. I'll link it under the show notes as well. There's a really interesting episode of The Guardian's Today in Focus this week came out about the sort of AI thing, and it gives quite a balanced view on it. So I'll include that if people are interested to hear more qualified people talk about AI. But it is interesting that you play, you know,
When I wrote about an AI washing machine, I wrote about, I guess, the best case scenario use of AI, which is to take mundane
hmm,
um, tasks off our hands. But
Mhm.
even that can escalate into something that has a greater impact on our life than we realize.
Yeah.
Um, I'm also, not to go off on one, but I'm also hugely concerned about the impact that AI has on the climate, um, which is,
Yeah, I think I read somewhere mental. It's like a pint of water is used per.
every time you ask GPT a question, it pours out a liter bottle of water
That's crazy. That's crazy. But I
or
think
something like that.
what I think will be key and what will be really interesting in the next 10, 15 years is if we can crack making energy usage more efficient and cheaper in humanity, because that would actually have a huge impact on so much in a
Yeah.
positive way. So let's maybe the AI will figure that out for us. Who knows?
I mean, not to be a conspiracy theorist, but the people that are pushing AI are billionaires. The people that are pushing AI are the ones on top of the food chain right now. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think that is just something that makes me incredibly suspicious is that they do not have, like, oil bosses do not have our interest at heart. They don't have the climate, they don't have the interests of the climate at heart. Like, I'm just increasingly suspicious by who is encouraging us to use AI. And I'm also increasingly concerned about how AI is generating news articles and generating
Mhm.
there was something I can't remember what publication it was, but there was a summer book list that was generated by AI that was published in an actual newspaper recently, and half the books on the list were invented. They weren't even real, and nobody fact checked it. I think it is compromising the integrity of journalism. I think it's compromising the integrity of um, the human ability to think critically.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
I
and being perfect as well. I think the problem is
yeah,
we're gonna go into a world where everything is perfect
yeah,
because we put it through ChatGPT. And what's beautiful about art, without sounding too deep, is little mistakes that you do by accident that lead to. So I think, yeah,
yeah,
I'm trying to think. Like our conversation today is we're being very honest about things in our life that are messy, and we're doing these projects which are great, but I mean, I hope that.
yeah.
It's hard to replace because you do get AI podcasts now, and I'm sure you could lift my voice from all 170 episodes of this show and probably do a decent attempt to. I mean, I don't know how they would want to do this necessarily, but do you know what I mean? You probably could, in theory, do a Just Get a Real Job episode, but it probably wouldn't be as raw and messy as we're able
Because
to. So it's not good.
there are things about us that you can't replicate.
Mhm.
And I think as well, there's been conversations that I've had recently about people using AI to write funding applications or to actually write work itself. And I just think, well, the process of writing a funding application is the process of you figuring things out. It's the process of you scribbling down thoughts in order to hone them and shape them into the actual idea. It is a funding application or an application of any kind is you're working. So if you can't do the working, why do you think you should get money to do the work?
Simon Sinek, who I quite like a lot of his work, talked about how he really worries for the future generation of how are we going to learn any skills? He's written so
Yeah,
many books, but he's like, it was the process of me writing the book and going through the work of writing the book that I learned all this stuff I can take into my life. Then there's a place for ChatGPT. We're all busy. There's a use for it. Like you can work with it to brainstorm or help you, do an application or I don't know, like say doing a fund application, there's a place to use ChatGPT in that, but you still it has to have a bit of you in there. Do you know what I mean? It's
yeah,
not using it
yeah.
to completely do something, it's using it to help. Um,
But what I was also going to say is I think we've yet to see how AI can be used for good in terms of making things accessible.
hmm.
Um, to be, yeah, to how can it help people do things easier who find things? I mean, this isn't coherent at all. Basically, I think I don't want to say AI is terrible
No, completely.
when
It's about giving people the opportunity. I completely hear what you're saying. It's about giving people who maybe wouldn't have always got a chance the opportunity. And I think it is doing that. I mean, I'm
yeah,
dyslexic. It's the best spell check I've ever had in my life. I use it
yeah,
sometimes to help me do podcast bio stuff because I'm running a show myself. And there's positives to it completely. We're not saying don't use it, but there's also
yeah.
concerns. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was like to wrap things up because I know we've been speaking for a while, and
You've
I've
got
got
to go.
yeah, exactly, and we're we're busy people as we were saying, but I've just got two more questions for you. But one of them is just what is something you were talking about advocacy earlier. What would you, if you could change something right now in the creative industries, what would it be like? Just if you had the power to change something.
That's a really, really good question. I think what I would encourage or what I would try to advocate for is for people who, and this comes back to the career stage definitions that are going to be fluid and are still to be workshopped. But I think there are, this might sound controversial. I think there are artists, companies, and venues, for example, who are established. And when you are established, you are part of the establishment, which comes with a certain level of power and responsibility.
Mm.
Um, and I would really encourage them to look at what supporting artists actually means, because sometimes it's not throwing a couple of £100 at an artist to do something. Sometimes it's which great, that will definitely benefit a handful of people. But if 150 people are applying for one spot, you're creating another hoop for them to jump through.
Completely, completely.
You're creating more competition, and quite often, getting an opportunity like that is on the premise of a false promise of employment. Um, Whereas actually, the one way that you can really meaningfully support grassroots artists is, or artists at all, is just come to their work, um, pay for a ticket,
Mm.
um, come to their work, have a conversation. And again, I think we're not stupid. We realize that there's no money to program everything that you see,
Yeah.
but to feel like the establishment are interested and engaged in what's happening beyond the walls of their own, uh, uh, you know,
Do you know
domain
the argument
would.
I often make for this,
Mhm.
which I think, which is to actually think about it, just to make it purely about money, right? Because I think a lot of establishment, that's how a lot of producers or companies have to think, right?
Yeah,
By investing in the ecosystem of your industry and making it a healthy industry where there's more opportunity and you can nurture and keep talent, you
yeah,
actually benefit yourself in the future because you're guaranteeing more people that are going to have better ideas, and you
yeah,
actually make more money by doing that. If you, so it's thinking about how you invest in that. So for example, I saw recently, I can't remember the musician's name, but there's a musician who's on the rise, and they just did a small thing that they put £1 of all ticket sales towards venues in Scotland, or local venues. It's tiny stuff like that
yeah,
that makes such a difference because it's not about investing in one opportunity for one person. It's about investing in the ecosystem of your industry. This is the thing I've made about River City recently, right? That's been
yeah,
cancelled by BBC. Like, it's not about the show. They said last week in Parliament, they said the show was no longer value for money. I think they're actually not thinking about the bigger picture, right? Now, there's an argument there whether it's not about the show itself, but you need to invest in shows, whether it's River City or not, like that represent a healthy ecosystem in your industry. So they don't, it doesn't have to be River City, but it needs, if you invest in shows that are more long running or cheaper to make, then it is value for money because in 10 years' time, when you need more talent to make a bigger show, you have the industry there. It's kind of, I'm kind of babbling a little bit, but I think it's that investment mindset.
I totally hear what you're saying. I totally hear what you're saying. And I love the phrase investing in the ecosystem because it's about what I would really ask the establishment to do is look around at what already exists.
Hmm.
Look around at who's making work or who's doing scratch nights or who's creating these opportunities for their peers and invest in those opportunities and those artists creating those opportunities rather than create your own version of those things that are then in direct competition because grassroots initiatives like that simply can't compete with funded organizations that have salaried marketing departments.
Yeah.
Like that is, you're not, you may be supporting a handful of us through those things, but you are not supporting the
Hmm.
ecosystem at large. because that then creates a really unequal
Yeah.
playing field
And
where resources are not going to artists, they're going towards your own brand,
Mhm.
which may be a bit of a hot take because I don't think necessarily when I say the establishment, I am very aware that there are, humans behind those decisions who are doing what they think is best. Um, but I really do passionately think that if you know what's on the ground and you invest, we keep saying invest, but if you treat that as legitimate work that is being made and find ways to endorse it and be more open to being part of that as a cycle of work.
Mhm.
Because what I would love to see is all the work that's happening at Scratch Nights across the country find a pipeline into production. Um, and we can't do that ourselves.
No.
I don't need a venue to come along and say, hey, can we host your Scratch Night? I need a venue to come along and say, hey, I saw that at your Scratch Night. We would love to produce it, or we would love to co-produce it, or we would love to give you some money to develop it.
Yeah.
Because then the artist that's presented it at my platform gets an opportunity. Like that's the level of investment that we need,
Mhm.
not any lip service, not any, hey, great, we're going to get on board on with this thing because they're doing a great thing that we should be doing.
Yeah. And I think
Again, that is criticism, but it's just the reality.
yeah, but this is the thing, right? I know money's tight, and I know that I completely agree with that argument. I get we're in a cost of living crisis, but the cultural industries are worth billions and billions of pounds to the UK, right? We should actually utilize this even more, right? Because it gives the UK soft power in the world, and it also
Yeah.
gives the UK. It's good for the economy, which is, we don't think about that as much as creative people. It's not as interesting to us, but on the, I think that's why to take it outside the creative industries, it benefits the whole country, and that's why we should invest. We've only got a few minutes left before we need to wrap up, but I just have one more question for you, which is, what's the biggest lesson you've learned since we last spoke 2 years ago?
Oh, do you know I've got two actually. The first is that I enjoy directing more when it's not my work. I think I love writing and I love directing, and I want to do those two things separately. There may be some exceptions, but I feel my most creative when I'm directing work that another brilliant writer has created, and I can ask more objective questions and have more fun with it without the anxiety of being a writer. And I think my other lesson I've learned, which probably kind of wraps up a lot of the things I've already spoken about, and might be me going off on a little rant again, but it's to realize that even within our own industry, we are one ecosystem, but we have to start thinking of ourselves as part of a wider ecosystem. Um, we the arts is hugely impacted by immigration rules. It's hugely impacted by cuts to PIP. Um, we as artists, if we want solidarity from the wider public, we have to give it in return. We have to recognize that yes, we can advocate for our own place in society in terms of, legitimizing what we do and its value, as we've just spoken about. But we also have an immense power to speak up for other people.
Mm.
Um, and actually, I think maybe I get a bit frustrated at how the arts can become a little bit of a bubble. Um, and
The-
every time an election rolls around, I'm like, there's so many wonderful liberal thinkers who are not necessarily as engaged in other issues. Again, a hot take, but I think what I've learned is that the role of the arts is much, much wider
yeah.
and much, much more. We have a huge social responsibility um, in both how we make work and what our work is.
Mhm.
What are we actually saying? This is maybe the root of that question, the answer to that question. What are we saying and why is it important? Like we do have a lot of power to speak up on things. And I think who was it? I think it was someone wonderful like Nina Simone who said, art, the role of the artist is to reflect the times. And I really feel and absorb that now more than ever.
It's interesting. I do completely agree that the arts is far too much of a bubble, and I think it's
Mm.
actually really something I'm trying to. It's really rich for me to say this when I work in telly and do a podcast about the bloody arts, but I'm trying to make this podcast more,
Mm.
not just focused on. I think a lot of what we've spoken about today applies to not just the creative industries, but lots
Yeah.
of societal things, and yeah.
But I think you're doing that anyway because you are a very generous interviewer in that you make space for people to talk about their lives.
Mm.
And that's exactly what I mean. It's being able to talk about our lives, not just as artists, but all of the wider things that affect us all the time.
Yeah,
Like
I
we are living in unbelievable times where the weight of the world and the collective grief of the world is so heavy, um, that being able to connect is a huge blessing.
Yeah, completely. I think that's a really nice place to end on. But Kat, it's been lovely to have you back on the show. I've loved this conversation. We've been I
So,
think it's nice to just be honest. It's almost like a bit of a therapy session in some ways, but we can get some rest before our big event. But reminder that yeah, we're doing our live show
yeah,
22nd of June. Also just for the listeners, because I didn't mention this in the intro, but this episode will be out, and then there won't be a new episode next week. But I am doing a live show, so if you want a podcast that week, just come and see that instead, and then the podcast will be back to normal service the week after. So yeah, but yeah, no, lovely to chat, Kat. Thank you so much for your time and keep doing what you're
yeah.
doing. It's really important.
And you, thanks for having me, and I'll see you on June 22nd.